Hi, I'm Lori Chamberlain.
And I'm Cheryl Kloss.
We are excited to present this content today. This is session 16, Preventing and Teaching Instead of Reacting, Effective Behavior Management Practices for All. Both Cheryl and I are teachers and BCBAs. And because of that, we love promoting educational practices based on the science of behavior because of the pragmatic outcomes that promote learning for all students. Both Cheryl and I work for the Patent Autism Initiative. Our main focus is to provide you with preventative strategies and a proactive approach to prevent problem behaviors. And, and we also want to help you maximize instructional opportunities across the day. So, effective teaching occurs when we establish cooperative learners. The best investment a teacher can make is to ensure the foundation for effective instruction is established. It is essential to create an environment where students really want to learn. We don't want our students to just comply in order to get away from us or get away from instruction. So our goal is to provide you with strategies to build cooperative learners, increase motivation for learning, prevent and reduce problem behavior, set up an environment where students want to learn, give you practical interventions for assessing and teaching communication skills, and talk about essential skill sets to address various functions of behavior. Do you ever find yourself saying these things? Such as, like, I just wish the student would be absent, I need a break. Or, it was a different bus that picked him up today, so it's going to be a tough one. Um, I think we have all said these things. So today we want to give you preventative strategies in order to prevent problem behavior as well as alleviate the stress that you have with dealing with these problem behaviors. To start off, we are basing all of our interventions and all the strategies that we're talking on today on the science of human behavior. So, why do we talk about applied behavior analysis so much? Well, it's based on the science of behavior, and Freiman discusses how ABA promotes the circumstances view of problem behavior. So, it gives us a view of behavior that is more proactive and pragmatic. If we blame the learner, there's not much we can do about it. There's not much that we can do. The problem is inside the learner or inside that person. So we want to make sure that we don't do that. It just stalls us. It doesn't give us a way to talk about or deal with the problem behavior. So if we focus on the person as the source of problem behavior, we tend to say things like, well, they're just a bad kid, or they're just lazy, maybe even we say, well, they have a mental illness. That's why they do what they do. We can even say things like, well, the parents let them do it, so what can we do about it? Where if we use the science of behavior and apply behavior analysis, the source of the problem is viewed as circumstances, things that happen in the environment, a previous history of what has happened to the person. So it's actually kinder, maybe more difficult to use in comparison to blaming, but the approach based on ABA actually gives us something that we can do to change the behavior and change the environment. And so we recommend shifting our focus from blaming to a circumstances view and to base our interventions on the science of behavior. So, ABA is an evidence based practice. It is widely recognized as one of the most effective interventions for children or individuals with autism. So, while ABA is not a curriculum, it is the practical application of principles of behavior and determined by science. And these principles have been successfully applied in the field of education, especially with individuals diagnosed with autism. The goal of ABA based interventions is to improve the life of individuals we serve. We promote the individual so they can communicate and have a better life, so they can engage in social situations and advocate for themselves. The main goal is to teach skills that will be valuable to the individuals we serve. Now, Cheryl is going to talk about how to set up the environment for success and how to get started.
So, in his 2021 article, Pat Fryman stated programs that alter aspects of the environment, reduce or eliminate a broad range of problem behavior. We are going to begin with this presentation with a discussion of environmental factors that need to be considered as a preventative tool to problem behavior and to maximize effectiveness of instruction. Okay. Just like building a home, it is critical to build a strong foundation when teaching. Before you have ever start teaching a student, it is important that your foundation of organization in your classroom occurs. An organized classroom will help a teacher maintain the value of reinforcers by not allowing students to come into contact with them for free. An organized classroom will allow a teacher to easily transition between tasks with students and to effectively manage data systems. Just like a lesson plan requires a clear plan, which often lists materials and procedures, so should your general classroom organization. So what happens when the foundation cracks? Cracks in the foundation show when students respond inconsistently. Undesired behaviors occur, such as students eloping from the workspace or not wanting to come to the workspace. Data collection is inconsistent, and students are making limited or no progress in their programs. These factors may be due to downtime in between instruction, free access to reinforcers, and not being reinforced quickly enough. As educators working with children, it is important that we control the variables that we can. Our classroom environment and how we teach are those important variables. If problems still occur after we have established an appropriate learning environment, we can begin to look at other variables and analyze how we should intervene. Remember, our students come to school each day to learn. We must also teach them how to get ready to learn. A basic principle of human behavior teaches us that behavior is largely the product of its immediate environment. What this means for educators is that students must be taught to behave well in their primary learning center, which in this case is their classrooms. So, creating a foundation for your classroom. It is critical for the classroom environment to be arranged in a manner that will allow for optimal instruction. The following considerations should be taken into account when arranging your classroom. Keeping your classroom free of clutter to allow for appropriate classroom flow. Special considerations should be made for students with limited mobility, such as wheelchairs or walkers. The students and adults should be able to easily navigate the environment. Teachers should be able to monitor the area, so if you choose to use dividers, they should not be so tall that you cannot see over them. Number 2, provide appropriate seating. Make sure that students can have an appropriate attending posture. So for our young students, that means seating that allows their feet to touch the floor, and for older students, seating that they can comfortably fit in. Number 3, arrange the physical space of the classroom to allow for successful student responding and cooperation. So once again, if you choose to use partitions and dividers to structure your classroom or minimize distraction for students, during individual instruction, consider short dividers that will accomplish the purpose, but at the same time allow the teacher to have a clear view of her classroom. Also structure the classroom so that you have enough stations to allow for individual instruction as well as group instruction. Number 4, strategically place students and staff throughout the room. If you need to position a student to minimize the likelihood of eloping, consider the surrounding area, either having a wall behind the student or the student has to move past other adults to leave their area. However, do not limit or prohibit the liberty of motion or entrap the student. Number 5, create a schedule so that everyone knows exactly who they are working with and what they are doing. And 6, provide staff training on procedures and follow up and check for fidelity. Remember, training does not have to be lengthy. You just need enough time to allow your staff to come together and ask questions. So this is from Bill Heward's 2003 article, 10 Faulty Notions About Special Education. Special educators should focus their attention and efforts on those aspects of a student's life that they can effectively control. As special educators, we know that our students can come more than with just their backpacks and lunch pails. We know that they may carry in home experiences. However, we must remember not to get caught up in the thought process. I know it is easier said than done some days. We must focus though on the things that we can control and what we can work with within our 4 walls, or in the 2020 universe through our computer screens. So here are some sample classroom environments. Notice that there are systems in place to help keep organization. Both teachers in these examples use bookshelves. You can see that student materials are near the workspace and they're readily available to the teacher. In the top photo, you're also going to see some wall cues on the board. These wall cues are for the adults in the classroom to utilize. So wall cues are an essential part of the classroom organization because they allow for staff to have immediate access to student-specific, procedural, and general information. Having wall cues posted in your classroom will help all staff to have explicit information while working with students. Wall cues can prevent interruptions from staff asking questions during specific instructional times. So here at the top, you'll see in the blue table examples of wall cue topics that may be posted within your classroom. And the bottom is a wall cue for an accepting no protocol that each page would be displayed in the classroom. Do you find your eyes growing bigger and bigger when you see the amount of materials that your students may have? Don't worry, we're going to help you organize this. We are going to give you a very brief overview of organization, but if you want more information about organization, Amy Miller will be presenting her presentation, Invest in Success, Organization Secrets to Transform Your Classroom, on Thursday morning. It is session 47, and I highly recommend you check it out. So first things first, you're going to want to start with getting a 3-tiered cart. Select the size based on the needs of your classroom. These examples here are simple 3-tiered plastic carts from Walmart, but you can utilize any type of storage system that fits the needs of your classroom. But these ones are very easily to acquire and they're fairly cheap, but they allow you to organize your students' materials all in one place. So in these drawers, you're going to organize materials such as student program books, clipboards with your cold probes, card sort systems. You may also have other instructional materials such as objects and direct instruction materials, and even reinforcers for your students. Now, if your carts are so filled that the reinforcers cannot fit, don't fret. It's often a good idea to have your reinforcers in their own container so that the students don't have free access to them. Okay, and on top of organizing materials, you're going to organize your data collection. So you're going to notice, once again, you're going to have a large amount of paperwork when you're working with our programs. Skills tracking sheets, graphs, and cold probe sheets should all be printed and readily available to staff members. You can consider organizing them in a tabbed binder or utilizing a hanging file system like you see in this picture. Just using one of those old crates and some hanging files. It's a really great, easy system to use. Other things that you may want to have readily available are tracking sheets for problem behavior, behavior plans, and parent communication logs. Organizing your program book is critical to maintaining accurate records for reporting progress on your students. Keeping an organized binder to quickly record student information will help with that. And having these systems in place will allow you to have more fluidity during your school day. There is a lot that occurs during a school day that a teacher can't control and account for, but organization will help you maintain accurate records in the face of all those unpredictable events. Your monthly fire drills or weather drills or that random assembly that just pops up. So make sure that you maximize your time for instruction by taking your data daily. And I know that might seem counterintuitive, but however, if you take your data daily, then you aren't taking it home every weekend to work on it. So just give yourself 5 minutes after cold probes and work on your graphing. So I just wanted to briefly show you, here are some samples of behavior data. So remember, the data you are collecting should be guiding your decision making. It is important that when you try to identify problem behavior, to have data relevant to that behavior that is occurring. So here are a few samples of data collection sheets. You have a time interval sheet, you have a potential line graph for frequency of problem behavior, and you have antecedent behavior consequence data sheet, ABC recording. I'm going to go into more detail about those specific forms of data recording later in this presentation. So your classroom schedule. Active student engagement is one of the factors that are directly correlated with student achievement and reduction in problem behavior. Therefore, you want to make sure your schedule incorporates the most engagement and instructional time as possible. Even when you don't have a one-to-one student to staff ratio, And in most cases, in many cases, your schedule cannot be one-to-one regularly. In these cases, it's important to identify what students can work independently, if any, and what students can be paired together. Also remember, if a student is not working with staff members, they should not have access to their best reinforcers. We want to make sure that reinforcement always comes from the adults in the classroom. So components of your schedule. Your schedule should provide clear information of what is occurring in your classroom. Your staff should be able to look at the schedule and know what they are doing and who they are working with. This will help maximize your instructional time and avoid interruptions to ask who, what, when, and where. So general schedule guidelines. A minimum of 75% of your intervals should be directly tied to program instruction. Since our time is so limited with our students, we want to make the most of our time. So instead of doing a snack time where students get free access to items or only request for items at that time, schedule in man training opportunities throughout the day so students have many opportunities to practice that skill. Time intervals should be no longer than 30 minutes, and of course, exceptions can be made based on the student's needs. Remember that reinforcement should be embedded into your work schedule time. The idea of having work for 20 straight minutes and then reinforcement at the end is a no-no. Make sure we're interspersing reinforcement throughout those work trials. And then once again, if you need time to log your data, schedule time in your intervals so that there are 5 minutes at the end where you can provide a reinforcer to the student while they're with you and you can graph and log your data. So it is crucial that the schedule is centrally located. We often recommend utilizing wall schedules because they are big enough that everyone entering the room can look up and see what everybody should be doing. Wall schedules with Velcro, magnets, and dry erase are easily editable that in the event that a student or staff member is absent, it can be easily changed. There is nothing wrong with having a printed or digital schedule, but just as I stated, an editable wall schedule is extremely helpful when you encounter the constant changes that occur in a classroom. So troubleshooting tips. Be flexible. Remember, the priority is the student's needs and incorporating the most engagement and instructional time as possible. You have to find creative ways to provide instruction. Always make sure your schedule reflects the student to staff ratio in your classroom. Whether you are consistently without a one-to-one ratio or it happens without notice, you want to make sure you have a schedule and a plan that reflects what is happening in your classroom. One consideration is creating a down one staff member schedule. You would use this in the event any staff member is absent, regardless of whether it is the support staff member or the teacher. Having a plan for when a staff member is absent, thus creating the need for grouping students. This helps to avoid stress when staff absences do occur, and it also allows you as the teacher to review with your staff before the absence recurs. Ask yourself which learners can be part of a group. Be mindful of the students you are grouping. Are the students you're grouping able to tolerate working near each other? And is this a reasonably manageable group for staff? If you have two students that engage in the problem behavior of eloping, you may not want to group them together because that would be unmanageable for your staff. Also consider students that are early learners or have other behaviors that may not be able to tolerate divided attention and need a more dense schedule of reinforcement. So why is organization and schedule so important in regards to behavior management? Bill Heward once again said in his 2003 article, "It is not productive to talk of the influence beyond the classroom with such high-sounding phrases such as ecological management and wraparound services until the teacher has demonstrated that he or she can create a classroom environment conducive to improved behavior and learning." So it is crucial that we create a classroom where the teacher and the adults can help establish motivation within that classroom. A sanitized environment helps with that because any reinforcement is coming from the adults. This will help the student view the adult as the giver of good things. The presence of the adult signals the availability of reinforcement. And Lori is going to talk more about this later in the presentation.
Thank you. Cheryl just got finished talking about schedules and how schedules are useful for minimizing downtime and maximizing instructional time. Now let's discuss how to teach in order to not only minimize problem behavior but increase acquisition of skills and learning opportunities. To get started, we need to talk about the ABCs. And the ABCs provide us with a context and a systematic way to analyze behavior and to analyze instruction, the environment, events, the circumstances, and anything that's going on in the context. So let's get started. A stands for antecedent. Antecedent is anything that happens before a behavior. The most important antecedents that we can talk about are those that occur immediately before behavior. B stands for behavior, and behavior is anything a person does. It's not necessarily only bad behavior. And the most effective way to talk about a behavior is with observable and measurable terms. That gets back to the circumstances view of behavior. If we talk about behavior in observable and measurable terms, then we can do something about it and we can be more effective. And C stands for consequence. Consequence is anything that happens after a behavior. Again, is not only tied to bad stuff. And the most important consequences that we can talk about are those that occur immediately after a behavior. If we are good at analyzing the environment and analyzing instruction with the ABCs, we can become better teachers, not only with handling problem behavior, but we can become more effective instructors. I know there's a lot of information on this slide, but this slide gives us a brief overview of the different types of antecedents and consequences. I'm going to go through this rather quickly and give you brief and very simple definitions of these things for now, and we're going to dive into this further throughout this presentation. I'm going to start off talking about behavior again. So behavior is anything that a person does. In our case, in the educational setting, we're going to be talking about students. So behavior is anything that a student does. Again, remember that if we talk about behavior in observable and measurable terms, it is more effective. So if I say a student is frustrated, that implies the problem is within the learner and the student, and there's nothing I can do about it. But if I say the learner hits the table or pushes materials on the floor, that is more observable, and therefore we can measure it. And it's important to be able to measure behavior too, because we're in the business of changing behaviors, and we want to decrease problem behavior and increase instructional behavior and behaviors of the cooperative learner. So if we talk about behaviors in measurable terms, everybody's measuring the same thing, and then we can see if our interventions are effective. So that's why we talk about behavior in observable and measurable terms. Now let's talk about consequences. Remember, consequences are anything that happen after a behavior. And the first type of consequence I'm going to talk about is reinforcement. Reinforcement is so crucial for us to understand so that we can become better teachers. So reinforcement is anything that happens after a behavior that increases that behavior in the future. If we are very effective at using reinforcement, we're in the business of increasing behaviors, and that's what we do as teachers. So we want to make sure that we understand what reinforcement is. Remember, I said it's anything that increases a behavior in the future. I didn't say it's candy. I didn't say it's praise, it's tokens. Reinforcement is not tied to a specific thing. Reinforcement is tied to actually behavior, and always increases behavior in the future. So reinforcement can be something as simple as I walk up to the door and I push on the door opens. When the door opens, I'm reinforced. So it can be naturally occurring. Reinforcement can also be something that we are purposeful at using. For example, if I give the student a head squeeze after they engage in a behavior that I want to see increase in the future, and that behavior increases, then that head squeeze functioned as a reinforcer. So reinforcement is anything that happens after a behavior that increases that behavior in the future. There are two types of reinforcement, positive and negative. And these things can be somewhat confusing for people to understand. So I'm going to just present a very simple definition right now. But positive reinforcement is when behavior is increased in the future by adding something to after that behavior. So things like adding praise, adding stickers, adding food, adding head squeeze. If that increases behavior in the future, then it was a positive reinforcer. Negative reinforcement is when you remove something after a behavior. So, an example would be if you have a headache, you engage in behavior in taking Tylenol, and then that behavior or that headache is removed, then in the future you will more likely take Tylenol when you have a headache because it removed that bad thing from happening. In our classrooms, negative reinforcement could be if your learner is falling to the floor when you're trying to do instruction and you say, okay, you're done, go take a break, then that student falls to the floor more frequently when you have instruction in the future. Guess what you did? You just negatively reinforced and increased that behavior. So we need to be careful and understand what negative reinforcement is, because if we can accidentally reinforce behaviors by removing bad things and increasing that behavior in the future as well. So some things you need to know about reinforcement. For it to work best, it's important for it to immediately follow a behavior that you want to see increase in the future. And the most effective reinforcers are those that occur immediately after a behavior. Another important principle is the principle of differential reinforcement. So that's when we give better reinforcement for better responses. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in the next slide. Another thing to know about reinforcement is what we try to use as a reinforcer must be valuable to our learners in the moment, or to the person in the moment, for it to function as a reinforcer. And that's how reinforcement is tied to the concept of motivation. And now let's talk a little bit about schedules of reinforcement. There are some different types of schedules of reinforcement. There's continuous reinforcement, where you reinforce behavior after every time that it occurs, and that's the best way to teach new skills. And then there's intermittent reinforcement, where you reinforce after intermittently. It can be after an average number of responses, or it can be after an average number of time, or it can be after a fixed number of time, or a fixed amount of time, or a fixed amount of responses. So we're going to talk more about the schedule of reinforcement later in this presentation. Right now, I just want to say that the variable ratio schedule reinforcement is what we want to use in instruction, because it produces strong and steady responses, and I'm going to talk about that in the upcoming slide. Extinction is also a schedule of reinforcement, and extinction is when we no longer reinforce a behavior that was previously reinforced. And when extinction happens, behavior fades and goes away. The last consequence I want to talk about is punishment. And punishment is anything that happens after a behavior that decreases that behavior in the future. And while we're not going to be talking about how to use punishment in this presentation, I just want you to know what it is, so that you can be more effective at determining if what you use or what you deliver after a behavior, if it increases that behavior in the future, it was a reinforcer. If it decreases that behavior in the future, it was a punisher. Okay, now let's talk about antecedents. Antecedents are those things that happen before a behavior. Motivation is an antecedent that occurs before behavior that alters the value of our reinforcers. And it also evokes behavior that has got us those reinforcers in the past, or we engage in behavior to get those things, or maybe we engage in behavior to remove those things. So that's the idea of motivation. It is an antecedent that alters the value of our reinforcers, and I'm going to talk more about that in the next few slides. The most important thing to walk away from with the idea of motivation is that if things are of value, students will behave to get them. And now let's talk about discriminative stimulus. A discriminative stimulus, or SD, is an antecedent that signals the availability of reinforcement. And during teaching, SDs can include things like a teacher's voice, our directions, materials that we use, and things like that. And again, I'm going to talk more about that in the upcoming slides. And last, prompts are antecedents, things that occur before behavior that ensure that behavior will occur until the student can respond to the SD. So now we're going to talk about reinforcement. Remember, reinforcement is anything that happens after a behavior that increases that behavior in the future. So we reinforce behavior, not students. One example of reinforcement is, for example, if you tell a learner to sit down, they sit down, and then you deliver tickles, and then in the future when you tell that learner to sit down, they do so because good things have happened, and you reinforce that behavior. Another example of reinforcement might be the following. The student falls to the floor and you hold up their favorite toy and you say, remember what you're working for. In that moment, you may have reinforced them falling to the floor because you brought out something good that happened when they fell to the ground. And so in the future, they might fall to the ground more frequently because good things have happened. So reinforcement can occur whether you realize it or not, or whether you plan for it to occur or not. And so it's very important to understand how reinforcement works, because it is essential for teaching behavior and understanding how to reduce the problem behavior and the behavior that we don't want to see more of in the future. I'm going to show you a video of a learner that engaged in some problem behavior. The teacher told him to sit in the chair and he fell to the ground. Now you're not going to see that part in the video. That happened like 2 minutes before this video. So in this video, the learner is willingly sitting in the chair because what we did was when we said sit in the chair, he got his favorite movement of rock. And so every time he sat in the chair, he was rocked in the chair. And so then every time we said, go there, sit in this one, he did so because it was correlated with things getting better and reinforced.
Okay, come after this one. Over here. Whoa! Okay, come here. Okay, come back. Come back here.
Take that duck away.
Oh, you did it!
Put it in the basket. You don't need to do that.
So you can see how the simple rocking him in the chair increased the value of sitting in the chair. Behavior. Now I'm going to talk about some antecedents. The first antecedent I'm going to talk about is motivation. Motivation occurs before behavior and it alters the value of our reinforcers. So this slide shows that. For example, if a learner has a whole bunch of chips during snack time, and then you try to use chip as a reinforcer during instruction, that chip won't be as valuable because they just had a whole bunch. So it decreases the value of that chip as a reinforcer. And so it also decreases any behaviors that have been used in the past to get chips. And it may even increase behaviors to remove that chip. Or, for example, if the learner hasn't had any food all day, or any chips during snack, or any food during snack, but instead we are trying to use chip as a reinforcer during instruction, then that chip will be more valuable as a reinforcer, and the learner will engage in behaviors that have obtained that chip in the past. So this also shows the importance of understanding motivation is important for understanding how to increase the value of those preferred items that we want to use as reinforcers. So one of the things that we do, and what Cheryl talked about, is if we sanitize the environment, if we keep all those things that we want to use as potential reinforcers in a bin and only use them when we're working with the learner, and they don't get them during their free time on their own. So that will maintain their value. One thing that may decrease the value of our reinforcers is if we give them their iPad all day or during their downtime or during their free time. Then when we try to use that iPad as a reinforcer for work, it won't be valuable in that moment, because if they got it for free without having to engage in any behaviors, why would they work for it? It won't be useful as a reinforcer. Now let's talk about the discriminative stimulus. The discriminative stimulus is an antecedent. It happens before behavior, and what it does is it signals that reinforcement is available. In this example, if you see the chip on the table, it might show that it is available. And if it's valuable, then the learner will engage in behaviors to obtain that item. If there are no chips available, the container is empty, then it is not available, even though it may be valuable. And another way to talk about the motivation and discriminative stimulus: something may be valuable, you may have motivation and want it, but it might not be available. So if you are hungry, you haven't had food in a while, you've been deprived of food, food would be valuable, you're motivated to find some food, and you will engage in behaviors to obtain that food. And one of the things that you may have been reinforced for before is driving to your favorite restaurant to obtain food. So food is valuable, you engage in behaviors to get it, you drive to your favorite restaurant, the sign says it's open. That sign is the SD that signals food is available at that establishment. Okay, so another scenario, if you are hungry, food is valuable, you haven't had it in a while, and you engage in behaviors to get food like you used to in the past, and so you drive to your favorite restaurant and then you see a sign that says, sorry, we're closed. Food is still valuable, but in that case it is not available. And so that is a little bit about the difference between SDs and motivation. Now let's talk about a form of motivation and things that can occur before a behavior and alter the value of our reinforcers. So one type of motivation is what we call the aversive nature of instruction. So originally, our teaching materials and the presence of a teacher might be neutral, but over time, as the teaching materials and the presence of a teacher is paired with things that make that aversive, after repeated occurrences of those things, of those neutral items, such as our teaching material and the teacher being paired with teaching, begins with the removal of the fun stuff. There's very little reinforcement or fun stuff that occurs with teaching and with the instruction. Maybe there's frequent disapproval with instruction. Maybe tasks require a bunch of effort. Responses are difficult, very hard for the learner. There's a lot of demands and very little fun stuff. There's frequent errors. No one really likes to make a lot of errors. There's delayed reinforcement systems in place. There's not a lot of positive reinforcement. And if breaks are used as reinforcers, which imply that instruction is aversive and something to be removed, after a while, after these repeated occurrences, the effects are our learners want to escape. The value of escape is pretty high. They want out of there. And so this is the idea of how motivation changes our instruction into a worsening set of conditions. And our teaching materials become warning signals that things are about to get bad and increase the value of escape. So how do we change that? And that's what we're going to be talking about. How do we improve our instructional effectiveness? How do we establish instruction as a set of improving conditions? We want to increase learning opportunities and make things better for our learners when instructional materials are out. We want to reduce the value of escape. And to do that, we have to establish that the teaching environment and materials are a set of improving conditions. Or in other words, things get better when the student is learning. We want our students to want to learn, and we want to increase the cooperative behaviors of our learners. Jack Michael said it best in his 2000 and 2007 articles that we want to increase the effectiveness of our instruction, and we want to improve the instructional practices so that instruction results in less failure, more frequent social and other forms of reinforcement, and other general improvements in the demand situation to the point at which it may not function as a demand, but rather as an opportunity. So how do we make our instruction as an opportunity and a set of improving conditions, and instead of something to be escaped and avoided? So to do that, we want to make sure that our teaching begins with fun stuff, that the best stuff happens at the table with the teacher, that we have frequent reinforcement, that we use a variable ratio schedule of reinforcement. Reinforcement should be immediate to be most effective and to increase the behaviors of a cooperative learner and to make learning valuable to our learners. We want to use a variety of reinforcers. We want to use novel reinforcers, mix in easy and hard tasks. So approximately general rule of thumb is 80% easy, 20% a hard instead of all hard tasks. Make sure that the responses are at the correct level for our learners and that we are not trying to teach things that are too difficult for our learners. Use task variation, errorless teaching, error correction. Look at our pace of instruction, look at our duration of instruction. We want to fade in our demands. Don't remove demands. Don't use a break card, because break cards maintain the aversiveness of our instruction. We're going to be talking more about the instructional practices that establish work and learning as valuable and improve in cooperation. So again, this is the list of the things that we can use and strategies that we can use to ensure that instruction is a set of improving conditions. And this is from the Carbone et al. Article in 2010 that looks at how to reduce the motivation to escape instruction, and how to establish instruction as a set of improving conditions. So what can we do? We can use positive reinforcers that compete with the problem behavior. We can mix and vary tasks, reduce learner errors, use errorless teaching methods, intersperse easy and hard, fade in number demands. Look at our reinforcement systems. Make sure that they're immediate, that we have a good rate of reinforcement. What kind of reinforcers are we using? Are we using differential reinforcement? We can look at our pace of instruction and look at the idea of extinction for off-task responses. So we want to teach that instruction is a set of improving conditions. And how do we do this? We embed these strategies into all teaching procedures. When we're doing intensive teaching, discrete trial, group instruction, natural environment teaching, we want to make sure that we talk about how to make learning fun for our learners. We want to pair instruction with positive reinforcement. We want to fade in our demands gradually. We want to look at our reinforcement systems. Are we reinforcing immediately after the behavior we want to increase? Are we using enough reinforcement? We need to reduce learner errors, use a fast-paced instruction, and use a pace that will minimize that downtime, making sure that we are prepared and we're providing learners with frequent instruction. And intersperse easy, hard tasks, mix and vary instructional demands, and teach to fluency. So I'm going to be talking more about this, but also I want to put in a plug for Ashley Harnett and Jamie Motzko Garcia's presentation. They are presenting on effective instructional practices for meaningful student outcomes. And it's really important to look at that, because good instruction minimizes problem behavior. And also, I want to put in a plug for Andrew Bulla's session. Please watch session 19, where he is talking about how to apply precision teaching across all stages of learning and how to teach to fluency. And these teaching strategies will increase learning opportunities, but also decrease our students' motivation to want to escape instruction. So, how do we get started? First thing, start off instruction with good things. Pair instruction with positive reinforcement. Get rid of that warning signal. So, we gather all the fun stuff, and then we start to deliver that fun thing, the things that our learners prefer when they're near us, when they're making eye contact with us, when they're turned towards us, when they're with us. We begin instruction with fun things. And then when they are engaged in those fun things, we're actually a part of it with them. We don't just give them their fun things and watch them do it, but we can make it better. And if we can engage in that activity with them by making it better, we are correlating ourselves with good stuff and not just with instructional demands. We want to also avoid delivering those preferred items when they're turned away from us or when they walk away from us. When they're walking away from us, if we remind them what we have that's good, what we're reinforcing is them walking away from us. Remember, the best, most effective form of reinforcement is that reinforcement that occurs immediately after the behavior we want to increase. So if our learner is turned away from us and we deliver something good, what are we increasing? Them looking away. Where if they're turned towards us, are walking towards us, and then we give them good things, what we're increasing is them looking at us, are walking towards us. And in Kelly et al.'s 2015 article, they talk about how to provide short interactive engagement, kind of preparing sessions before instructional time, and how that can lead to a general reduction of challenging behavior. So I recommend looking at that article. So we start off instruction with good things, and then we start to fade in our demands. So why should we do that? It minimizes problem behavior, but it also promotes social interactions and social initiations. It provides that foundation that social interaction is good stuff and is not just paired with worsening conditions. It's not just aversive, but when they're engaging with other people, then that leads to good, fun things. So once we start that way, we provide them with good things for being near us, then we need to start fading in our demands, and we want to move from child-led activities to intensive teaching sessions. And we want to do so in such a way that will minimize problem behavior and the motivation to escape. So we fade in demands gradually, and that will also build the familiarity or positive relationship that we have with that child. Schillingsburg and her team in their 2019 article systemized a potential sequence in how to fade in demands. And so I'm presenting this to you as a modification of what they presented in their study. The general rule of thumb when fading in demands is that you want to do 80% easy. 80% of the time you want to present easy tasks for the child or the learner, and then 20% of the time we want to present the more difficult tasks. So when you're systematically fading in demands or systematically teaching a new skill, 80% of the time you want to use what is easy, and then 20% of the time you use the target instruction or more difficult tasks. So if you proceed with this criteria of success and building cooperative behavior as the child responds, you will be able to move from a child-led activity to more intensive teaching and fading in your demands to getting instruction at the table. So this is just one example. I just want to say that you should always individualize this process based on the learner, based on your data, and based on the responses. So you want to present easy demands or have fun activities away from the table and then at the table, and then when the child makes eye contact with you, approaches you, stays with you, give them more fun things, and then start to build in some easy demands. And those easy demands will vary based on your learner. And as they are complying with those easy demands, you reinforce those cooperative behaviors. And then you can start to build in more and more easy demands, and then start to add in targets. And that's a general sequence that you can use to start to fade in your demands. Here's a video that shows a little bit of that process. I'm not going to play the whole video, I'm just going to play part of it so you can kind of see how this teacher is fading in her demands. First, she's just giving the learner fun, good things for being near her while she's on the floor.
There you go. There you go. You want to throw the ball? Oh boy, here we go. Ready? Make it big. There we go, buddy. Here's a Pop-Tart. You're doing a great job sitting on the floor. Come here. Come here. Come here. Listen. Ready? Ready? Oh, there he goes. There he goes. Let's go to the table. Come here. Oh, wow. That's how you go to the table. Nice job, buddy.
So you get the general idea. So she's playing on the floor, and then she's able to move them to the table. And this happened. It might not happen that fast. It might take some time, and so you individualize it for your learner. Some of the other things I want to point out and how to maintain your reinforcers, the value of your reinforcers, and how to keep your instruction fun. First, vary the number of reinforcers that you use in a session and across the day. Don't use the same things all the time. Don't just use that one ball that they like all day long, because it's going to lose its value and it's not going to maintain effectiveness as a reinforcer. Vary the way you deliver the items. Don't always deliver items in the same manner. Don't always go, here you go, here's your gummy, here's your gummy. That the learner will lose interest, and the reinforcer won't maintain its value. Vary the schedule of delivery, and talk more about this later, but don't always be predictable. Give the reinforcer after an average number of responses, and so not always after the same response. Vary the type of reinforcer used. Do not always use food or the same stuff. Mix it up. So use social praise, use tangibles, use food, use head squeezes, rock. Just have fun and mix it up, and don't always use the same item all the time, or you can actually what we like to call kill reinforcers. And then stop delivery of reinforcement before it loses its value. This is really hard to do, because when you're getting that good belly laugh out of your student, out of your learner, you are reinforced, so you want to keep on going. So stop and move to something else before it loses its value, and don't keep on going with that one fun thing that's working. Mix it up. And avoid using too much at any time. So we use smaller amounts of food, or a little bit of that video, or a little bit of tickle, and then move to something else. And that will help maintain the value of your reinforcers as well. Here is a video that shows an example of how to use a variety of reinforcers, also how to use more specific praise, how to make those preferred events more fun by participating with it with the learner and not just giving it to them, and how to establish social praise as a and social interactions as reinforcers as well. So here is a video on how to use a variety of reinforcers.
An airplane. It is an airplane. Good job. Here's your Mario game.
Whoa, my Mario game. I have a Mario game.
Very good.
Yay.
Here's a round of applause for Lou. Very nice. High five. Let's put some out in front of you.
I love it.
Some bubbles.
Say. Yay, bubble! Yay, pop! That's fun.
That is fun. I love popping bubbles. Yes, it is Noodles.
Yes!
Here's some lotion for you. Good. Yes, you got it, friend. Here's a tickle, tickle, tickle. Comes the pig. Oink, 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 oink,
That's a
oink.
actually that's a kitty.
That's a kitty. That's a pig. All right, pig kitty. What are you doing, pig kitty?
I want something to eat.
There you go. Good job. Let's go on the trampoline. Put in. All right. You got it, buddy. Here's the lollipop. Put on. Nice job putting on. Here's some spray. Ready? Doop, 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 doop. Put in. Ah, you got it. Good job putting in. And do what I do. Good job putting the glue stick on your head. Which one do you want? The hand and the snake. Ready? Here it goes like this. Ready, set, let go! There's Blue. And the sun. And the dinosaur. There you go. Let's play with your house. You can sit in chair. Good job. Let's watch some Blue's Clues. There's Blue. It is a grapefruit. Let's do your puzzle. Here it is. Nice giving. Here's some Blue's Clues.
So that's a very nice job of how to use a variety of reinforcers embedded in your teaching session, and how to use specific praise instead of just good job all the time. That you notice every teacher used more specific praise, telling the learner what they did do that was good. And last, the teachers all did a nice job of participating with the reinforcer with the child and making it better. And so those are all great techniques to help you maintain the value of your reinforcers and to ensure that learning is fun and that you're increasing learning opportunities and developing cooperative learners. Real quick, I know Cheryl covered this already, but I just want to show one of the reasons for organization is it increases the pace of your instruction. If you have your materials organized, you can go at a nice pace. It also helps you mix in the easy to hard. So you see there's a bucket of easy tasks, and when they're done, they're put over here so that you don't use the same tasks over and over. So it also helps you mix and vary the tasks you're going to do. When we use materials, we tend to put the directions for the materials right on the objects, and that also helps you go fast. So you pick a material out and you see what you're going to do and you can do it. And this is another example with the bins. All of these in bin 1 are put on tasks. These are all match to sample tasks, and so you get the idea that if you have the organized materials, you're able to go at a nice pace. It doesn't slow down your instruction. It helps you do your easy to hard ratio. 80% easy, 20% of the targets are the hard tasks, and it actually helps you mix and vary the tasks. When you're talking about a material sort kind of system, you're mixing more with the items that you use than necessarily the directions, and that's one way to mix and vary to ensure that instruction is still fun and not something that becomes something that is aversive, hard, or to be avoided. And these organized materials are individualized for each learner. For more information on this topic, please watch session 47, where Amy Miller talks about organizational secrets to transform your classroom. This is just another example of how to organize your materials. So one thing that I want to point out, if a student has a lot of skills, there should be more cards and more materials created, and that this process of organization should be individualized for each learner. Okay, so now we're going to talk about errorless teaching. So errorless teaching ensures successful responses and promotes skill acquisition and minimizes problem behavior. First, we need to talk about prompts. Prompts, remember, are antecedents that ensure the correct response will occur and should not be confused with the discriminative stimulus, which is signals the availability of reinforcement. And discriminative stimulus, or SDs, should ultimately control the response. So if prompts are not effective or don't work, we need to look at what we are teaching. Prompts should be known and easy skills. And if they're not known and easy skills and not effective, then we need to look at what we're teaching, and maybe it is what we're teaching and expecting out of our learner is too hard. So this looks at the importance of composite skills. If the prompts are not easy or known skills, then you are probably teaching something that is too difficult for your learner, and you need to take a step back and look at what you're teaching. Okay, so general rule is that known skills are used as prompts. All right, now here are the steps in errorless teaching. Prompt, transfer, distract, check. This is generally how we teach errorlessly. First, you prompt. It's a 0-second prompt. You present the direction, or the SD, and then right after that you prompt. So it's a 0-second prompt. It's not simultaneous. We want the direction, or the SD, to control the response and not create a prompt dependency problem. So then after we prompt, we want to fade our prompts, and that's when we do the transfer trial. And so it's where we transfer from prompted to unprompted. After a transfer trial, we generally run some distractors. We put some other responses between the transfer trial and the next trial, which is the check trial. And in the check trial, that's where we look for recall, or a response after some distractors have occurred. And it's generally a little bit more independent response. If the learner does respond during the check trial, that's when we reinforce, because that's the most independent response. So these steps in errorless teaching, prompt, transfer, distract, check, are used in our intensive teaching session. We can use it in group. We can use it in the natural environment, and it's very effective for teaching basic skills. We use other errorless teaching strategies for teaching more complex skills, such as problem solving. You might use talk aloud procedures or joint control procedures. And so that form of errorless teaching, you can find out more information about that in session 13 with Dr. Vince Carbone, or session 54 with Dr. Willow Hosella. But for teaching basic skills, we're going to look at teaching errorlessly with prompt, transfer, distract, check. And I'm going to show you an example right now of what that looks like with the verbal operants.
Clap your hands. What's this? Cracker. What's this? Match. Do this one. What's this?
Nice.
Cracker.
Prompt, transfer, distract, check there. And with the distractors, you're using other known skills, so you're practicing those other known skills and maintaining the as well. Here's another example of prompt, transfer, distract, check with an older learner. And this is with a material sort and functional items.
Ready? Do this.
Do this. Close. Good. Do this. Good job. So in that example, you see prompt transfer, and then the transfer is really a faded prompt because she's not able to fade it out totally. And then reinforcement is delivered, and that's one of the distractors. And then she comes back and she does the check trial, and he does it more independently, so then she gets better reinforcement. So this is an example of how to do errorless teaching, how to maintain an easy to hard ratio, and use better reinforcement for better response. You might notice that error correction is very similar to errorless teaching. The only difference is an error occurs. So when an error occurs, we want to correct it right away. Because we're teaching these basic skills, we want to make sure that the learner is engaging in the correct response. There are 3 types of errors that we consider errors. One is a wrong response, one is no response. If the learner doesn't respond within 2 seconds, then we error correct. And then self-corrections are also considered errors, because these things are basic component skills that our learners must know and shouldn't guess on. So when I show a picture of an apple and I say, what is it? Our learners should say apple and not be guessing. So they see it, they say what it is. We build this fluent responding in to these basic skills because it is the foundation for more complex skills. So when an error occurs, the first thing we do is end to avoid chaining that error, and then we start over. So once we end, then we represent the direction and then prompt, and then do the transfer where we fade the prompt, and then we run some distractors in there and then come back and check. And I'm going to show you a video of what that looks like. This is error correction. What is this? Say cat. Wave. 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 What's this one?
Car.
What's this?
Here.
Wave. Nice job waving. Woo! It's a nice video of role modeling error correction. Okay, now let's move on to reinforcement during teaching sessions. And like I said previously, we use a very variable ratio schedule of reinforcement. We do so because it produces strong and steady responding. When a learner is first learning a new skill, we might use continuous reinforcement and reinforce that new skill to establish it on a continuous schedule. But then once skills are learned, we move to a variable ratio schedule of reinforcement where we reinforce responding on an average number of responses. In intensive teaching, we reinforce at the end of a run-through, and a run-through is the total number of trials from the first direction or first SD to when we reinforce. And so what we might do is we'll set a student's VR based on their responses. And I'm going to show you a video on how to set a VR in just a moment. But what I want you to know is we set a student's VR based on how they respond on both good and bad days. So you don't set a student's VR variable ratio schedule reinforcement at a 5 on bad days and 10 on good days, because then what we're doing is we're reinforcing more frequently when the student has more problem behaviors and less frequently when they're responding well. So in that sense, then we would be reinforcing problem behavior and increasing those quote bad days. The general idea is we'll set a VR based on the student responding. And let's say a student's VR, we reinforce after an average number of responses is 5. So that means sometimes we reinforce after they respond 3 times, sometimes after 6 times, sometimes after 2 responses, sometimes after 4 responses. And over the entire teaching session, that average number of responses then comes to 5. One way to help maintain our variable ratio schedule of reinforcement is to, once we set the VR, when we're teaching, We know that sometimes we reinforce after 5 responses, and then sometimes after 3, and sometimes after 7, but we don't really go more than 2 over or more than 2 less than the VR of 5, and that helps us maintain the variable ratio schedule reinforcement of 5. Another general rule of thumb to use to help us set our VRs is that if, for example, I do a run through that has 7 responses, then the next run through I'll have only 2 responses or 3, and that will help me maintain the VR of 5. So we set our VRs according to how our student responds. So we'll work with our students and see how they're responding. When we start to see a little bit of that, quote, inattentiveness or fidgeting, that's when we'll end the session and we'll count that. And then we'll use that, let's say they'll respond to 3, and then they start to fade off. So we use that as an indicator that we need to set our VR for lower than that, because that's when they start to kind of lose their attentiveness and their cooperation. And we use that as a guide to help us set our VRs. So here's a video example on how to set a VR so that we reinforce cooperation and strong responding in our teaching sessions. Do this. What's this?
Ball.
Jump. What is this one?
Car.
Do this. And what are these?
Cheese.
They are cheese. Here's your seltzer. What are these?
Cheese.
Touch the comb. What's this one?
Suitcase.
What is it? Lunchbox.
Lunchbox.
What is it?
Lunchbox.
Clap your hands. What is this?
Lunchbox.
It is a lunchbox. Ready? What am I doing?
Nothing.
What is this?
Car. Van.
What is it? Van.
Van.
What is it?
Van.
Put your arms up. What's this one?
Flower.
And what is this?
Van.
What is a van? Have your seltzer. Ready? Do this one. What is this?
Bunny.
Touch the candy. Say cat. Tap the table. What is this?
Glasses.
What is this one? It is a pig. And touch the blocks. That is blocks. Give me 5. So you get the general idea on how to set the VR. I want to end this portion of this presentation by just noting the following. All these things that I talked about are ways to reduce the aversiveness of our instruction. And I used example with intensive teaching and working one-on-one with learners, but you can use these same techniques in group instruction. And I want to promote Kristen Hewitt's presentation, which is session 24, where she talks about how to say goodbye to all your struggles with morning meeting and how to use effective group instruction for all. And it's really important to use effective group instruction, and these guidelines, these principles that I just talked about, are useful with group instruction as well, and should be used with all learners, whether or not you use direct instruction or not, in order to promote acquisition of skills and reduce problem behavior. Now that we have established effective strategies in how to teach and how to cooperate and how to establish cooperative learners, let's talk about what to teach. So you might be asking, well, how does this tie into dealing with problem behavior? If our students are motivated to escape instruction, it is as if they're saying, I hate this, or this is too hard for me. So we have to take a look at what we are teaching. It is probably too difficult. Just because a learner can do something or you have seen them perform a skill doesn't mean that it is an established skill or that it is easy. Well, I've heard many people say, well, he can do it. Well, I can build a piece of furniture with instructions. It doesn't mean that it is a functional piece of furniture, or I won't be sweating and swearing the whole time I'm doing it, or that the end result will be pretty. Or so, just because someone can do something does not mean that it is easy for them to do. Before I talk about specifics, I kind of want to point out the importance of selecting evidence-based practices and not just using anything that we find out there to teach our students. I know Dr. Travers is discussing this issue more in his presentation, session 44, on pseudoscience, science, and decision making in the educational program. I'm going to point out it is our ethical responsibility to maintain challenging expectations for our learners and not to waste time. What's the harm in trying, you might say? Well, instructional time is permanently lost. And as Dr. Travers is going to point out, that even with the best intentions, lost time and effort can lead to teacher burnout, and it can lead to our learners trying to escape our demands or not learning at all. I know that selecting evidence-based practices is not an easy task, and the time spent in selecting such interventions and programs is extremely important and should guide what we teach. I can tell you that prioritizing and making these decisions is very important. I encourage you to watch the session on reading and math that are being presented. Session 36, Amiris DePuglia is presenting on the role of verbal skills in the reading process. It's so important to establish these verbal skills that our students need in order to be effective at reading and learning how to read. And then session 22, Jared Campbell is presenting on math beyond early numeracy. And he has previous recordings on how to build those early numeracy skills that you should watch as well when you're looking at selecting math instruction for our learners. So remember, even when you do select the evidence-based practices, if a child does not have the prerequisite skills they need to be effective and to learn those skills, or if they don't have previous learning experiences where learning is fun and learning is something that is a set of improving conditions, then even if you use evidence-based practices, if your learner is not ready, then you are not going to have effective results. So the assessment piece, teaching skills to mastery, providing the type of learning experiences that promote cooperation and a love of learning is so very important. If you try to teach at a level that is too high, too soon, escape motivation will increase. So this is why I am fervently discussing this. This is so important. And why I'm kind of going down this little rabbit hole, which is really not a rabbit hole. It is extremely important to select evidence-based practices and not to waste the time of our teachers or our learners, and not to add to our students' frustration or teachers' frustration. I just want to point out a very important piece of information. Our students don't have time to waste, and neither do we. So let's look at how to identify meaningful goals that are socially valid and address the core deficits of our learners. So we need to prioritize what we teach our students based on their skills. And the first part is to do an assessment. But we also want to also prioritize building those important prerequisite skills that our learners need to be successful when we are doing more complex skills. So you might be able to teach your learner how to read and how to do math skills, but if they don't have the communication skills, then you're teaching them something that is not meaningful to them. So we want to make sure that we always tie our academic instruction to communication, to verbal behavior, and teaching those essential verbal operants to fluent measures before we move on to more academic type skills. We want to teach our learners how to play appropriately, how to engage in independent activities, in vocational and job training type activities. So the starting point for all instruction is assessment. So the first thing we need to do is do our assessments, do the behavioral language assessments, do social skills assessments, activities of daily living, independent skills, those curricular-based assessments. So the one point about assessment that I want to make is you'll do your assessment, you'll see what skills your student has, and then you'll see what skills they need to be taught. If your student is struggling, then you have placed them too high. So take time to build those foundational skills. If you go too high too soon, your learner will have these weak skills. You may be practicing errors, and you might have to reteach or unlearn some things, and that takes more time and effort, and to unlearn bad or unhelpful skills. So we want to make sure that when we do our assessment, we place them at the appropriate level, and we teach appropriate skills in a good sequence. So you've completed your assessment, and now you know what kind of performance level your learner is. Are they an early learner, intermediate learner, advanced learner? And the definition of these things is really important. An early learner is maybe someone that a learner that needs to have learning as established as a set of improving condition. You might need to teach that cooperation. You might need to do what we would call a material sort based of level of instruction. So you're teaching them how to put things in things and do things based on context, not to teach them how to do those things, but to teach cooperation and to start to build these early forms of imitation and responding as a listener. And then we move into tact instruction, and the importance of tact as the foundation for academic skills, the foundation for comprehension. And tact instruction should happen and be pretty extensive before we move into those interverbals and those feature function class type programs, which are more for the intermediate and advanced learner. So when we're looking at instructional programs, we want to make sure that we build these component skills to generalization, to fluency. And there's a session by Dr. Morgenstern, Barry Morgenstern, on how to build in generalization and maintenance of skills. So when we're selecting the instructional programs, we want to make sure we teach these component skills and teach them to fluent measures and that our learner can generalize these skills. So when we teach the student to tact a picture of a dog, they don't just know how to identify one picture of a dog. They can understand basically the concept of dogs and identify multiple pictures of a dog and generalize, and not just identify 3 pictures of dogs, but be able to tact the picture of a line drawing of a dog and a small little Sheltie versus a German Shepherd. And so make sure we teach component skills across multiple examples and non-examples. Dogs that maybe look like cats, that they know that that's a dog. So sequencing our skills so that we teach these component skills across a wide variety of examples and not just one example. Looking at the acquisition rates of our learners. If they're learning tacts but it's taking them 2 weeks to learn them, you don't want to move into tacts of ongoing actions because they're still taking them a long time to learn the concrete just pictures and how to tact pictures of things. So look at acquisition rates before you move on in instructional programs. Make sure you're always selecting targets that are relevant to your learner. Where do they live? Do they live in the city? Do they really need to learn what a barn or a silo is if they're not really living in that environment? So make sure that it's relevant to your learner and their everyday life. And then we want to also select targets and things that will help build from easy to harder, more complex skills. So like I said, building those tacts, making sure that they can tact the parts of things, tact ongoing actions before we move into touch the one that has a tail. If they can't tact what a tail is, then we're not helping them by teaching them how to select things that have tails if they don't really know what tails are. So making sure we build those component skills before we move to more difficult skills. And so we want to make sure we sequence programs also from easy to hard. This is really important when we're really talking about, well, any skill, but when we're talking about imitation, when we move from, like do this to do this. This is a free movement that's in the air that's not grounded on anything, and it might be too hard, and we might be stalling out our program if we move and sequence our targets within the program from easy to hard too soon. So some of our learners need more of a keeping it concrete, keeping it grounded movements and imitation before we move into, even stuff like this that's out of their range of vision, that moves into something that they can't see. And then this might be a harder imitation for them than something that's right in front of them. So making sure we sequence our targets from easy to hard is really important when we're selecting targets as well. Okay, so now I'm getting into some specifics and how to teach some of these skills that are difficult for our learners. Transitions may be difficult. Accepting no, they might be grabbing materials. They might not give up reinforcers that easy. So this is really important to teach our students how to do these things successfully when it's not a problem, and I'm going to be talking a lot about that. But before I get into that, the first thing I need to do is talk about manding. So manding is teaching our students not only how to request things they want, but how to request actions, request activities, request attention. So mands benefit the speaker. It is functional and it is foundational and can decrease problem behavior, because a lot of times problem behavior functions as mands for our learners. So I'm going to present a very brief overview on this. Please watch the manding session number 56 by Tom Miller and Jolyn Jackson to get more details on how to teach mands. The process of teaching mands can be very complicated, and it can actually be harder for staff to learn how to do than teaching using intensive teaching sessions. But it is so important and to establish mands and to teach our students how to ask for things when they want them. I'm going to show a brief video on how to do this. And when we're teaching mands, we don't only need to teach mands at the table. We need to teach mands all throughout the day, provide hundreds of opportunities for our learners to mand in a variety of settings and as naturally as possible, but also at the table. So here's a little example of mand session with a learner that is learning how to sign to get things and activities that he wants.
Book. You can have the book. Giving the book. This is a car. Car. Woo! Here it comes. Comes the car. Woo! Car. This is a car. Car. Woo! Ready, hands. Marshmallow. You can have marshmallows. Marshmallow. High fives. Do you want your backpack? Backpack. right. Yeah. Brandon, sit in that chair.
You get the idea. So there's a variety of things that this young man can ask for. He's learning how to ask for car, marshmallow, and push. And so teaching mands is important for decreasing problem behavior, and also just teaching our learners that communication is valuable. All right, now I'm going to talk about how to use a promise reinforcer, and this is foundational for a lot of the procedures that I'm going to present on next. So when we use a promise reinforcer, what we're doing is we're identifying something that's valuable to our learners in that moment, at that time. And what we do is we show that item and then we give some sort of direction, whether it's to give an item or whether it's to transition and go someplace or to give up something. And so when we show that item, what it's doing is it's making our demand less aversive and easier to do. So when we use a promise reinforcer, we do not pull it out after problem behavior happens. What we're doing is we're using this as an antecedent strategy. We know something is going to be hard for our student to do. And so we then prepare for that event and pull out something that is valuable to that learner and present that and say, hey, give, or come here, or sit in the chair. And then when they engage in that thing, then they and cooperate, then they get that valuable item that we have shown. If we show a promise reinforcer and they don't follow that instruction or that demand, then we remove that thing and we continue with our demand. So it is very crucial to make sure that what we are trying to use as a promise reinforcer is valuable to our learner at that moment. The other thing that we do is we show the item and we say, sit in the chair. We do not say, sit in the chair and you'll get this M&M. That is a bribe, and that is not necessarily true if they don't sit in the chair, and also it's harder to fade out. So we just show the item and give the demand. Eventually we can just give the demand without showing the item, but the promise reinforcer is one way that we use to build cooperation and to make following demands easier for our learners. So remember, when we are using reinforcement, we are reinforcing the behavior we want to see increase. And so we want to use promise reinforcers for things like when we are interrupting a valuable activity or preferred activity and we know it's going to be hard for our learner, so we're interrupting something and we're asking them to do something else. Transitions are a good time to use promise reinforcers. Any kind of difficult demand, our speech therapists know that sometimes those echoic are asking our learners to vocalize can be very difficult. So we might show something valuable as we're asking them to engage in a difficult demand, such as saying a word. So these are times where promise reinforcers are valuable and easy to use. And another time is when we're asking them to give up other things that they do not like to give up. Perhaps they have their favorite toy, an iPad. They have an iPad and it's very hard for them to give up the iPad. So what am I going to do? I'm going to show them something of equal value to the iPad, which might be hard to find, but what I might use is my iPhone, which has a video on it that's one of their favorite videos, and I'll say give iPad. They'll give me the iPad and I'll hit play and I'll hold my phone for them. So that's one way to use a promise reinforcer to give up a valuable item. Promise reinforcers are useful for teaching programs such as Come Here and Walk With Me. These Come Here and Walk With Me programs and STOP programs are critical skills to teach for our learners that tend to elope, wander, or won't walk with us in the hallway. So instead of holding their hand and guiding them, it is good to teach them how to walk with us. So we would use a promise reinforcer during the initial stages of teaching this to reinforce that cooperation and walking with us. So I might have a learner that tends to elope, and I will hold a phone and play a video as they stay with me, and we walk in the hallway to the lunchroom or wherever we're going. But I also will then teach them this skill at other times throughout the day and teach them how to walk our stay with me, our come here, and I'll teach it across people, locations, and in various scenarios. We have a skill tracking sheet that I'm going to show to you in the next couple of slides. It's also on our resource file that helps break down this skill into easier steps for our learners. So you will establish like where your learner is, their baseline skill, and then that's going to be your first target and what you're going to teach them how to do. And then you'll systematically increase the level of difficulty while still practicing those easier skills. Remember what I said previously, 80% of the time you're going to do what's easy, and 20% of the time you're going to present your target. So when we're practicing Come Here, Walk With Me, or any of these programs I'm talking about in the next couple of slides, 80% of the time we're going to do what's easy for them, and then 20% of the time we're going to present that target skill. When you're practicing these skills, you are practicing them when they're not a problem for your learner. You're going to set up practice trials naturally occurring across the day, build them into your schedule. You will practice them anywhere between 20 to 50 times a day, and make sure that you're reinforcing those skills as they are demonstrating them. And so this is what we do to teach this skill of walking with us, or coming here across the day. And so one thing I want to say is, if a problem behavior does happen when you're practicing these skills, what you do is you quietly catch your learner. Don't make a big deal or give a lot of attention to it. Don't deliver any kind of verbal reprimand. And then you'll rerun and practice that skill again and do a transfer trial, and just minimize your attention when problem behavior is happening. I'm going to show a couple of videos of what this looks like. So this is an example of Come Here, Walk With Me, and Stop.
Sarah, come here. There's your grapes.
You see in this video, all the teacher said was, come here. She interrupted an activity and said, come here, and she held a valuable reinforcer in her hand. The learner came and got the item. Here is another example.
Sarah, stop. Good stopping. Go ahead, walk.
That is an example of building in stop when they're walking. Okay, here's some more examples of Come Here and Walk With Me.
Walk with me. Stop. There you go. There's your blueberries.
So she had the blueberries and she held them in her hand and said, walk with me, stop. And then as soon as she did it, she got those items.
Stop. Grab hands. Let's walk together.
So eventually you progress.
That's safe walking in the parking lot.
Eventually you progress to doing these things without promise reinforcers. So you're going to also use specific praise in these scenarios, like Ashley just demonstrated with her kids in the parking lot. You're going to say, look how well you're walking. You're going to practice these things, like I said, when it's not a problem. You're going to practice them between activities without physical prompts, and try not to use those physical prompts or any kind of like guidance with handholds as much as possible. You're going to start with shorter distances and build to longer distances. You're going to also use your voice as a tool. Remain quiet and calm, give the directions. When problem behavior occurs, that's when you move to a more firm but neutral tone. And so also use your voice as that tool. Here is the example of a skill tracking sheet for a Walk With Me program, so you can see how you systematically build up the distance with one person, and then you do Walk With Me or Come Here, walking between two people, transitioning and so on. So promise reinforcers are the tool that you use, and eventually then you do these programs without the promise reinforcer and drop that off. All right, another example of some helpful instructions and helpful behaviors to teach is to teach ready hands. Why do we do this? Well, if we have the learner with their hands interlocked like this, it's harder for them to get it apart to do other things like swipe materials or whatever. It's also a nice position to teach our learners to be cooperative and to learn when they're sitting there with their hands folded together, ready to listen. So it's initially taught, maybe as an imitative, you might say, do this. And then once the learner is able to do that in imitation, then you say, show me ready hands, and you teach it as a listener. Initially, you might use a promise reinforcer. Again, you hold up something valuable and you say, show me ready hands. They do it, they get that thing that's valuable. And you want to practice this when there is no problem behavior happening, because if you only practice this when there's problem behavior, then this becomes a signal that things are going to get worse. And saying, show me ready hands can actually incite problem behavior. So make sure that you practice this when it's not a problem. You reinforce when they show you ready hands, and that you use it judiciously. You don't use it too much when problem behavior occurs. You mix it in when there is no problem behavior, when you want to establish just cooperative learning, and that you pair it with when they do this, good things happen. And these pictures are showing you examples of various ways that kids can show ready hands. They might not have the ability to interlock their fingers at first, so there are various examples and things that you can do until to get ready hands. Okay, so ready hands is what a child does when they are waiting for things. So you're going to use ready hands when you need a child to wait, when you want them to learn. But when you say wait, you also want to teach your learners that I say wait, good things happen, and not things are going to get worse. So waiting is something that we, again, systematically practice and make it easy. At first you might say wait, and they wait 1 to 3 seconds, and then good things happen. And then as that's successful, then you might teach them to wait for longer periods of time, like 5 to 10 seconds, and then 10 to 20 seconds, and then 1 minute. Now remember that you're going to practice these things. You'll have a skill tracking sheet, and that once they learn how to wait 10 to 20 seconds, that's going to be easy, and anything under 10 seconds will be easy for them as well. So 80% of the time you'll practice those easy skills, and then 20% of the time you'll practice that harder skill. So make sure that you always reinforce when the student does wait. Now, if you say wait and they do not wait successfully, all good things move away, and then you will maybe give them some easy demands to follow and reinforce that with not as valuable of a reinforcer. Again, practicing wait is something that should happen 20 to 50 times across the day, and not just be something that you use when problem behavior occurs. Here's a very short video to show you what this looks like.
Ready hands. Wait. That's how you wait.
All right. Giving up reinforcers. This is another thing that we do to use a promise reinforcer for. A lot of our learners have a hard time giving up that iPad or those things that they find valuable. And so what do we want to do? We want to find something that is of value that will compete with what we're asking them to give up. And then show that as a promise reinforcer, and then say give. They give up that valuable thing, and then at first they get that thing right back, right? And so you teach them that trade, and then they'll get that valuable item right back. Eventually you teach them to trade and they don't get that valuable thing right back. Or you teach them to trade for something that's not as valuable, and then you teach them how to give up that item without a promise reinforcer. Again, this is something that you're going to practice throughout the day. Make it easy for them based on and base where you start on where your learner is at and how hard it is for them to give up their easy things. Again, 80% of the time you're going to have them practice giving up things and make it easy, and 20% of the time you'll be at that target level. Here is an early video of a learner that's just learning how to give up that valuable iPad.
Give me the iPad. Good job giving me the iPad. That's how you do it. You can have it right back. Good job giving me the iPad. You dropped a cheese ball.
All right, so you get the idea. All right. So again, so when we're teaching interruption transition, at first we teach them just to give up their valuable items, and then we start to build in other tasks. So we teach them how to give up that iPad, and then we teach them how to respond to one easy task at the same table, and then give them back the iPad. And then we put a chair next to them and we say, sit in this chair, and then they come back to their original chair and then get the iPad. So we teach them how we interrupt those valuable activities and teach them how to do some other things, and then they can come back to it. So interruption transition is one of those things that we practice, and we gradually make it more and more things happen in between giving up that valuable thing and then coming back to it. We have a skill tracking sheet that helps break this down, but again, you want to individualize this for your learners and where they're at. So and the last, we want to make sure we practice 80% of the time they're at a level that are easy. It's easy for them to give it up. They give it up for and then they get it right back, and then they give it, and that's easy for them, and they give it up and they sit in the chair right next to them, and then they come back, and that's easy for them. But your target might be giving up the iPad, performing a task, and then moving to the chair next to them, and then coming back, and that might be your target. So 20% of the time you would practice that, and 80% of the time you would practice those easier skills. And again, you would practice this throughout the day, not just all in one chunk of time, but interspersed throughout your day, and practice enough times so this is easy for them to do. Here are some examples of interruption transition with a promise reinforcer and without, because eventually you do fade out the promise reinforcers and you have them transition without using valuable items as a promise.
Sarah, time to get out of the pool and come get ready for bed so you can use your new soap and take a bath. Let's go take a bath.
Okay, and then here's an example of one in the home without a promise reinforcer.
Reedon, pause it. Go put Briar on his leash. Good job helping Mommy. You can have your phone.
Okay, so some quick summaries, quick ideas of procedures. So when you're doing interruption transition, present a promise reinforcer that's valuable to your learner, and present it before any problem happens. Present the direction with clear, direct wording. If the learner complies, give them the promise reinforcer and have them, and they can return to the preferred activity. If they engage in problem behavior, as soon as you request the transition, do not remove the demand. Instead, remove the promise reinforcer and remove the activity that you're asking them to give up. And then use physical guidance to help obtain compliance with the demand, and maintain safety of the student and others while you're doing this. And then once at the transition area, continue to place the easy demands until you gain instructional control. So you might have to go to some other demands and regain compliance and cooperation before you bring back reinforcement. And you do not give any additional reinforcement upon return to the original location after the problem behavior has occurred. So they start to comply, you get them to come back. You do not give any additional reinforcement. As the learner accomplishes successful transitions, delay the interval that they must wait to go back to the original activity. So again, this is something that you do systematically increase the time and the activities that they are being asked to do, so that you build in the ability for them to transition and to do anything upon request without a promise reinforcer. So the last protocols that I want to go over is how to use an alternative reinforcer. Sometimes we have to deny and say no, that our learners can't have something that they want. And a lot of times this can lead to problem behavior. So what do? We will offer alternatives. And so this happens naturally in our lives. Like if you go to a restaurant and you ask for a Coke, they say, sorry, we have Pepsi. Is that okay? So an alternative is offered in place of something that we can't have. And this will help prevent problem behavior and decrease like the severity of it. So this happens naturally in our life. And so we want to use this same technique when we're denying requests of our learner when they can't have something that they're asking for. So we use an alternative reinforcer. So say you can't, if they ask for iPad, no, you can't have iPad, but you can have cheese ball. Sometimes when we say the word no, there's such a history behind it with our learners. They can't handle the word no that we drop that off at first. So instead of saying, no, you can't have that, but you can have this, we say, if they ask for something, we say, well, you can have the iPhone, or you can have a movie. So we just don't use the word no. If the child does not engage in problem behavior when we offer the alternative, then we deliver the alternative reinforcer. And if they do have problem behavior, then all good things go away and we have them engage in other tasks and regain compliance and cooperation before we bring any reinforcers back into the picture. So this is something that we practice throughout the day, throughout Manding, throughout intensive teaching, throughout the student's day. And we embed these accepting no practice trials when it's not a problem. And again, 80% of the time we're going to practice this with easy. So a child can handle saying no to an iPad when we offer the iPhone. And that's easy for them because they're of equal value. Or if they love the iPad and they love gummies, but the iPad is more valuable, when they ask for gummies, we say, no, you can have the iPad. That makes things better for them, and it makes hearing no not so difficult. So we start by denying things maybe that are less valuable than the most valuable things, and we sequence it accordingly. So we deny something that is of lower value and offer them something more valuable at first. And then we start denying them things of equal value. And then we start denying them things that are of higher value and offer them things that are less valuable. And again, we have a skill tracking sheet that's on our resource file that helps you to sequence these skills. And I'm going to show you a quick video of this happening in the natural environment with individual, and then I'm going to show you what the practice trials might look like.
Can we go to Adrenaline? We can't go to Adrenaline right now, but we can go to Walmart to get some Play-Doh. Great! Let's go!
So that's when the alternative was offered, and it was just fine and just okay. Now I'm going to show you an example of how to embed accepting no practice trials into a MAN session. And this is a role play event.
Pretzel. Pretzel.
Nintendo DS.
Nintendo DS.
Ball?
Ball.
Harmonica.
Harmonica.
Seltzer?
No, but you can't have the seltzer, but you can have Music.
Seltzer?
Seltzer.
Planet Earth.
Planet Earth.
Pretzel?
No, but you can have the seltzer. Good.
Ball.
Ball, no, but you can have the seltzer.
I want the ball. I want the ball.
Show me ready hands. What is this?
Pen.
What color is this?
Red.
Red. Here, you can have the harmonica.
Planet Earth.
Planet Earth.
Book.
Book.
I think you get the idea. So that's an example of how to embed some accepting no trials into a man session. So all of those mans were, quote, known items and things that I could ask for. And then accepting no was run to practice that, embedded in that. So the one thing I just want to point out is if you have a learner that cannot man for things, you really can't run accepting no with man trials. So you would use other strategies, teach them how to man before you could actually run accepting no. And I just want to end with this caveat. So I would suggest teaching the replacement skills such as accepting no, wait, walk with me, and tailor your teaching those replacement behaviors to your individual students and practice those frequently throughout the day instead of using social stories. I know just because a lot of people use social stories doesn't mean it's really effective or really works. Justin Leaf has done some studies on social stories, any kind of story-based interventions, stories that describe social situations are appropriate behaviors to display and when to display them. So these social stories that people use are not really effective with learners that do not have the language or verbal behavior to understand those rules in those kind of stories. And a lot of times what social stories can do is draw more attention to problem behavior than actually effectively minimize them or decrease them. And the research has determined that even though there are a lot of research studies out there, the research has determined that the effectiveness of social stories is not really out, in reducing problem behavior is not really there. So now that I'm finished with what to teach and how to teach, Cheryl is going to present on the next steps, how to write IEP goals and behavior plans based on these proactive strategies.
Now that we've gone through how to arrange your classroom, what to teach and how to teach, now we're going to look at some IEP and behavior intervention plan considerations. So Bill Heward stated in his 2003 article that the special educator's primary responsibilities are to design, implement, and evaluate instruction that helps students with disabilities acquire, generalize, and maintain knowledge and skills to improve the quality of their lives in the home, school, and community and workplace settings. Special education is effective only to the extent that students with disabilities acquire and subsequently use knowledge and skills they did not have prior to instruction. This holds true for writing an effective behavior plan and behavior goals. If our students are only able to display socially significant behavior in our four walls of our classroom, then we have failed them. We must equip them to behave in the community. So this section is going to provide general information regarding behavior plans. Remember, there's no one-size-fits-all model. So considerations for specially designed instruction. Before a student exhibits any problem behavior, if possible, the above content can and should be included in the student's IEP, most likely in the specially designed instruction section. So Lori spoke a lot about this stuff previously. So utilizing a wide variety of reinforcers, utilizing errorless teaching procedures, fading in prompts, and using transfer trials, which will help promote independent responding, error correction procedures, use of a variable ratio schedule of reinforcement, use of a promise reinforcer, and presenting work materials in an 80% easy to 20% hard ratio. These strategies are all preventative techniques that we can utilize to help students learn and respond in an appropriate manner. So before you write a behavior plan, in this section, we are going to discuss where to start. Problem behavior is occurring even with the utilization of these preventative strategies. And for more information about the functional behavior assessment process, check out Tim Vollmer's 8 Ways to Enhance the FBA Process in session 49. So when writing a behavior plan, it is important to be able to topographically identify what the behavior looks like. So topographical is just what you see. This is called operationally defining the behavior. We also want to identify the function of the behavior, which is step 2 here. And we can do that with a variety of data collection methods to help with those things. So the data collection is going to help you identify that function of behavior. So definitions for behavior of concern and replacement behaviors must be operationally defined. That is, they must be written in measurable and observable terms. You can also think of them that they have to be objective, clear, and complete. So the definition refers to clearly observable aspects of the response or the events in the environment that are readily observable by some means. The definition is clear enough that a person who is unfamiliar with the situation could measure it consistently. The boundaries of the response are clearly defined so that you can determine quickly and easily what can be included and what can be excluded. These may include examples and non-examples. So remember, behavior is anything a person or a living organism does. In behavior analysis, we refer to the dead man test. If a dead man can do it, then what you are describing or writing about is not behavior. So when writing operational definitions, it is critical that someone who does not know the behavior can read the definition and identify what you are describing. And here are just 2 examples of behaviors that are operationally defined. Sorry for the flub there. And these definitions include descriptions of what is occurring so that you can see it and observe it, but also examples of what that behavior looks like and non-examples of what should not be included. Okay, so this slide has 3 very common non-examples of definitions for problem behavior. The first example of keep track of how many times the student is mad. Well, what does mad look like? To fix this, we would want to include something we can observe, such as the student emits vocalizations above speaking level. Vocalizations may be paired with tears coming from the eyes down the side of the face, or the student is propelling objects with a force at least 5 inches away, something that we can observe. And then you can also include a non-example of someone being mad, like they could be crying because they've injured themselves in a certain way. The second example here, I've made this mistake. So many of us as teachers, we always want to write a behavior goal of increasing that on-task behavior or decreasing the off-task. But what the heck is on-task behavior? And what does it look like? Our on-task behavior in gym class may look different than on-task in speech therapy, than on-task in reading class or music class. Also, this definition says not what to do. It says not playing around. Okay, that doesn't tell us a whole lot, but we really should define what it is and what it looks like. What does not playing around mean? Someone may consider that anytime the student is just sitting at the table, but that doesn't mean the student is engaged in what they are supposed to be doing. And then this last example, it's another common one, tantrums. Tantrums are defined as acting out when the student is not in control of the classroom. I don't know if I would know what that would look like if I walked into a classroom. So if a tantrum encompasses many behaviors, you want to make sure that you identify all of them: crying, screaming, throwing themselves on the floor, kicking, those kinds of things, making sure all of those little behaviors are defined in that big occurrence. So yeah, these definitions are not objective, clear, and complete. So if you'd like, you can feel free to pause this video and write down some more measurable and observable definitions. Okay, so remember, a good definition refers to clearly observable aspects of responses in or events in the environment. The definition must be clear enough that an unfamiliar person can identify and measure the behavior consistently, and including examples and non-examples are going to help in that. Taking the time to really define the behavior will help anyone who is working with the student to appropriately identify the behavior. In the end, this precision is going to benefit your student. So you'll see on the left-hand side is a longer definition of tantrum, but it includes all of the components of what a tantrum may look like for that particular student. And it's also describing instances where you're going to exclude certain measures. And then the definition on the right was that non-example that was earlier. Okay, so now you know what you are measuring and what behavior looks like. Now we want to explore measuring tools that you can utilize to help you. So this first form of data collection is ABC data. It's used to track antecedents, behaviors, and consequences, your ABCs, which Lori talked about earlier in this presentation. This form of data collection helps you identify variables that are maintaining behavior. This type of data collection helps you identify the function of the behavior. Other ways to identify the function of the behavior include an assessment tool called the FAST, or to test the conditions in the environment. Okay. Frequency. A frequency count. This type of data collection counts every instance of behavior. This type of data collection is best used for those behaviors that have a clear start and end, such as throwing or hitting, that you can actually see that, yep, this started and this ended, so you can click count them. The next one is duration recording. This type of data collection measures the total time a behavior occurs. This is a great tool for behaviors that go for long periods of time, such as tantruming or crying, but you also have to make sure that there's a clearly defined start and end so you know how long an episode occurs. Partial interval recording. This is my personal favorite type of data collection. So the partial interval recording requires you to break your day into equal intervals. If the behavior occurs at any part of the interval, you mark a yes. If the behavior does not occur, it is marked a no. This form of data collection is great for many teachers because it is less intensive. You only have to mark when you see the behavior. However, this type of recording does provide an overestimate of the problem behavior, so it is best utilized with behaviors that need to be decreased. And whole interval recording. It's very similar to the partial interval, but instead of the behavior occurring for partial of the time and you recording a yes, the behavior must occur for the entire interval of time. Because the behavior must occur for that entire interval for a yes to be marked, this provides with an underestimate of the behavior. This form of data collection is extremely helpful for targeting behaviors that you need to increase. And the last one is momentary time sampling. This also has the day broken up into intervals. You're going to set a timer When the timer goes off, you will check if the student is engaging in the target behavior and record. This is only an estimate of how often the behavior is occurring, but is a helpful tool in the group setting as you're just going to look up every time the timer goes off. It is important to collect data and select data collection systems that will provide you with an appropriate data for what you need. Remember, you want data to be meaningful and work for you. We love data as behavior analysts, but we don't want you to take data just for the heck of it. It must be meaningful. Okay, so functions of behavior. So you have identified the function of the behavior via your ABC data, the FAST, or testing the conditions. So now we're going to talk about what those functions are. We know what the behavior looks like after operationally defining it, and now we have to look and evaluate what the function of that behavior is. There are 4 possible functions of behavior: escape, attention, tangible, and automatic. We aren't going to spend much time talking about automatic functions today. Simply put, some behaviors directly produce their own reinforcement. A behavior is assumed to be automatically maintained only after social reinforcers have been ruled out. For those of you familiar with the functional analysis and testing the conditions, the alone condition is what helps us determine this. Okay. So here are the examples of the 3 functions that we are primarily going to focus on for this presentation: escape, attention, and tangible. We are also focusing on these functions in isolation of each other. However, there are many instances where problem behaviors may serve multiple functions, so just remember that caveat. And in their 1994 article, Day, Horner, and O'Neill stated problem behaviors may serve multiple functions, and under one set of conditions, a behavior may be maintained by social attention, while in other sets of conditions, it may be maintained by escape. So these multiple functions associated with problem behaviors may explain why in some instances you might have undifferentiated results or mixed results in your intervention. So we need to make sure that we're responding to the correct function of the behavior. Okay. So when writing a behavior plan, the first thing we want to do when writing a behavior plan is reduce motivation to engage in problem behavior. We're going to do that by the setting events that we can accommodate for, the ones that Lori talked about earlier and I talked about with setting up your environment. We want to plan for those antecedent conditions to prevent behavior and put those in our students' SDIs. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to want to teach a replacement behavior. The replacement behavior must meet and match the function of the problem behavior that is occurring for it to be effective. And we have to evaluate and consider what we're going to do in the consequence condition to reinforce that replacement behavior. And finally, the third thing you're going to want to do is put the problem behavior on extinction. That just simply means you're no longer providing reinforcement to the problem behavior, and we're going to talk about more considerations with extinction below. So you checked the box on that IEP software. After assessing your student and you have identified that the behavior is a concern, you need to reflect this in the present levels of functional performance. It is important that you have data through direct observations. So quantitative data using those frequency counts, using your ABC, your duration, whatever form of data you've determined is effective and needed for that behavior, you will include that here. Qualitative data such as rating scales and interviews can be useful, but should not be your only form of data. You're going to want that hard evidence. When you are developing your IEP and your student has behaviors that impede his learning, you are going to check the box. Checking this box means that the student must have a functional behavior assessment and a positive behavior support plan. For those of you that are PA state teachers, I just want to give you a quick reminder of the Chapter 14 regulations and the definition of what a positive behavior support plan is. And it's simply a plan for students with disabilities who require specific intervention to address behavior that interferes with learning. A positive behavior support plan shall be developed by the IEP team, be based on a functional behavior assessment, and become part of the individual student's IEP. These plans must include methods utilizing positive reinforcement and positive techniques to shape student behavior, ranging from the use of verbal statements as rewards for good behavior or specific tangibles. So Lori had talked about earlier about the use of reinforcement, especially positive reinforcement to increase behavior, and even our chapter 14 regulations state that as well. And one more caveat before we move on. Remember, when you are selecting behaviors to change, that you are going to select socially significant behaviors to that student. Behaviors that may cause danger to themselves or others are one reason to evoke behavior change. However, if there is a behavior that is just simply annoying to you or a colleague, but it doesn't warrant a behavior change to be targeted because it's not socially significant, you cannot target that for behavior reduction. So you want to make sure that you're targeting socially significant behaviors. Another caveat is to make sure that you rule out any medical concerns or medical issues the student may be having. Okay. So replacement behaviors. You have identified your problem behavior and its function. Now you have to identify the replacement behavior and what you're going to teach. Just remember that the end goal may be large, so you may have to break it up in small, manageable chunks that you're going to teach in small increments so that the student has some success. And Lori kind of talked about this earlier. I just want to touch on it again. You know, I said that replacement behaviors, the functions must match, but if the student is engaging in problem behavior to escape you, especially at the workstation, please do not target a replacement behavior of they will ask for a break or they will hand you a break card, because that in that instance, we're going to want to evaluate, why does the student want to escape us? We want to evaluate our learning outcomes, our instructional targets, and why that student is wanting to escape us. So we want to make sure that that student is getting their best reinforcement for us. And if they want to get away from us, we need to evaluate it and see what's going on. So the functions must match. So I have a couple examples here. This first one is the dreaded iPad, the biggest reinforcer for all kids and the biggest thing that is a pain in the butt for some teachers. I know it was my pain in the butt for a little bit until I figured out what to do. So you have your iPad out and the student wants it. You know that that student wants it because they're reaching for it. The reaching eventually turns into grabbing and even scratching to get the device. And in the process of you trying to block from scratching, you drop the device and the student is able to pick it up and have access to it for a short amount of time. So eventually you're able to get that iPad back, but the student has already gained access to it. So that behavior of scratching and grabbing has been reinforced. So what are we going to teach the student to replace this grabbing and scratching? This is an example of the student wanting a tangible item. They're trying to gain access to it, but they don't have the ability to request their wants and needs appropriately. So this is where MAN training is going to come in, teaching the student to request their wants and needs. This intervention is critical for all students because everyone has the ability to have their wants and needs met. So if you can't communicate that, we need to figure out a path to get you there. Even after MAN training has occurred, the student may exhibit a defective request for the item. This is our time to teach and error correct. Simply, we will just pause, bring the student to neutral, and prompt the MAN again. This is a count and MAN procedure, and you'll find some information about that on the resource file that Lori talked about earlier. So remember that our students need many opportunities to practice critical communication skills throughout their day. And oftentimes in this scenario, this item, this big, powerful iPad that causes so much problem behavior goes away for some time of the day, or maybe the entire school day it's not available. And in this instance, the student has no opportunity to practice. And if they can't practice, how are we supposed to teach them if it's never an option? Okay, so this is a similar scenario. So you have your iPad out for data collection, the student wants it. This time the student says, iPad, and you have to tell them no because that's your work iPad, you're taking data on it. The student tries to grab and scratch, and then you just give up and give the student the iPad. Okay, so similar function, the student wants the iPad, but in this case, they have the ability to MAN for the item, but it was not available to him. So this is where teaching protocols such as accepting no, waiting and transitioning away from items is important as the intervention. So two similar things, but you have to look and evaluate what's the problem. And then I already touched on this in the previous slide, but because this happens very often, I want to make sure I hit it home. Restricting all access to an item does not take away its reinforcing properties, but in most cases, it just increases the value of the item because the student rarely has access to it. It is important to set up a variety of opportunities for a student to demand for items, transition away from them, give them up, and accept no. Just like we talked about earlier, it is critical to have a clear plan of how to teach and implement these behavior procedures. If we don't teach them these skills, who will? So just by not letting them have that iPad, we don't meet the function or match the function. We're just saying no to them. They have no access. Okay. So extinction, we just talked about replacement behaviors, but what do we do with the problem behavior? One of the first things we determine with problem behavior is to make sure that that problem behavior no longer contacts reinforcement. This occurs in the consequence condition and it is called extinction. Because it is no longer reinforced, the behavior fades to low levels or levels of 0. However, because behavior is no longer reinforced, it also increases magnitude and variability of behavior. You may see behaviors that have never seen before occur. The one example that we always like to give is you go to the snack vending machine and you go and you hit that button and you put your money in and you hit the button because you're hungry and you want your snack and the snack doesn't fall. So you hit the button again. Doesn't work. You hit the button maybe a little bit harder this time. The next time you might go with your fist and hit the button and it's still not working. Eventually that magnitude change is also going to increase in variability. You might start shaking the machine, you might start kicking the machine, you might throw out some choice words, and eventually you might even put your hand in the machine and try to get the snack out. You still don't contact that reinforcement of the snack and you eventually give up. And in the future, you're probably not going to go to that machine again. So just like we increase in variability and magnitude, the students may also do that when extinction procedures are in place. So because of this, safety needs to be our first priority. And if you are unable to implement safety, then extinction may not be the right process for that individual in your classroom. Okay. So the other thing we're going to talk about is extinction by functions, and just the caveat that extinction looks different for every function of behavior. Extinction is not simply ignoring behaviors and they'll go away. So depending on the function, it's going to look differently. So being able to identify the function is critical so that you know how to respond. So in this example, we're going to do an attention extinction example. So a student who's working on an independent task during this time, the student has no attention from any adults in the room. And then the student gets up and hits the adult across the room. And so the adult could react and say, "Oh, Jacob, you hit me." And then another adult walks him back to the table saying, "We don't hit our friends," and then sits with that student while he finishes the work. Or we can respond with, ignore the hitting behavior and minimize attention and redirect the task. So we're going to want to ignore that behavior. Obviously, you may not be able to totally withdraw attention as you're going to have to redirect, but minimizing that attention during the hitting behavior is critical. We don't want to provide reinforcement in the form of attention for problem behavior. All right, and in the escape function, so you are working with a student and she pushes the materials from the desk on the floor. Now, I am totally guilty of this one before I knew better. So what should you do? Should you ignore the materials on the floor and present a demand that can be done without them? Or should you take your student hand over hand and help them pick up the materials and say, "Oh, it's time to clean up"? So the answer is you're going to want to ignore the materials on the floor and continue to present the demand, because in this scenario, even that brief delay of the task is enough escape to be reinforcing to some students. Yep, so there's our answer that just, yep. All right, so then the last example is tangible. The student wants to have the slinky that you have. The student screams when you bring the slinky out and grabs for the item. What should you do? The slinky goes away and is hidden for the rest of the day. Or There it comes. You briefly pause, say Slinky, and the student says Slinky, and then you can give them the Slinky. So the right answer is you want to do the brief pause, model the correct mand, and allow them to mand for Slinky. Having it going away is just taking away all the opportunities that student has to mand for that item appropriately. All right, so the plan must be clear. When you go to write a positive behavior plan, you must have a clear plan, which includes those definitions we talked about with your examples and non-examples, your replacement behavior, how to teach it, how to reinforce that replacement behavior, the problem behavior, and the crisis and safety plan. So here is a snip from the program modification section of a positive behavior support plan that many of you use. This is going to be your roadmap to your students' plans. So like I said, in the antecedent condition, the A up here at the top, we often see things like timers, behavior charts, frequent breaks. Take those out. We want you to put, here's where we want you to put your teaching procedures like count and mand, accepting no, utilization of preventative strategies such as variable ratio schedules of reinforcement, errorless teaching. Those are your antecedent and prevention strategies. And honestly, this form right here even says preventative strategies right after antecedent. In the behavior section is obviously going to be, oh, can we just go back to that slide? Sorry. In the replacement behavior section is going to be your replacement behavior, what it looks like, and how would we teach it. The first consequence section is how you're going to reinforce your replacement behavior and how are you going to make it happen again in the future. So if your replacement behavior is that student mans, whenever that student mans for that thing you want, you better give it to them right away. And then the final consequence is consequences for problem behavior, that bottom section. So this is where your extinction procedures will be. This is where your crisis and safety plan can be. This is critical that this is written out clearly. I often like to use stepwise fashion. So if this happens, you go to step 4. And if this happens, go back to step 2. This is so that anybody can pick up the document and know exactly what to do in any given moment of the behavior. It is critical for the safety of the student and for everyone else involved that it is very clear. And as I was writing this section, honestly, I found myself typing faster and faster than I could think because this is so important. And I didn't have all of these tools when I was first starting in teaching, and I wish I had. So I hope that this is helpful and this can help you with writing your important documents for your even more important students. Okay, so this is an adapted table from that Bill Heward article, and Lori kind of touched on these sections earlier, but I just want to hit home on these 2 dimensions, the research-based methods and the dimension that says guided by student performance. We must ensure that we don't get in the habit of saying, oh, we only do X program here, or I prefer this program because this one I find boring. The research is out there and it's up for us to use it. And we're working every day for our students. So it's important that the research interventions that we select are based off of their progress and their needs. So that is why we must take frequent data for monitoring of progress and adjust and make changes, whether the students are making progress or they are not making progress. They're counting on us to work for them. So it's important that we are on top of our game and we are informed. Here are some examples of measurable and observable behavior goals for students. You will notice that the goals have no mention of prompting. That is because our goal is for independence for our learners. That being said, we will use prompts when we're teaching, but it's critical that we fade those prompts as quickly as we can to prevent dependence on prompts and promote independent responding. Our main goal is that our students will generalize their skills in their community. The one thing I always think about for waiting, what if our students couldn't wait at the grocery store line? What's going to happen if they can't wait independently? They won't have someone there to prompt them and say, it's time to wait. We all hate waiting in those lines, but we can do that independently without problem behavior. So it's our jobs to make sure that our students can do that in their community. You will also notice that these goals all say without problem behavior or 0 occurrences. Once again, that is in relation to the generalization piece. Another example I like to think of in regards to transition, we want to make sure that our students transition all the time when we ask them to. Because if you're at work, it's always easier to transition from your work desk to your lunch room. But sometimes, you know, even at jobs that we love, it's hard to come back after that lunch and come back to work for those last couple hours of the day, but you still do it. But what would happen if you only transitioned back to your work desk from lunch 80% of the time? Would you have a job still? So we must think of those things, even for our younger students. So these are some non-examples of behavior goals, and these are non-examples because they are using prompts. They are accepting 80% as the criteria for mastery. The one of the most eye-catching ones to me is about transitions. I've always worked in a rural setting, so if my students were going to elope or improperly transition from the playground of all places, that they were either going to farming fields, wooded areas, or to the only main road. All of those things are extremely dangerous. So this is why saying a student would transition with 80% and 80% of opportunities is highly unethical and extremely dangerous. We must have our students promote their safety skills up to 100% at all times. So this is a quote from the article Behind Schoolhouse Doors that really resonates with me. It says, research has shown that the most effective way to reduce problem behavior in children is to strengthen desirable behaviors through positive reinforcement rather than trying to weaken undesirable behaviors using aversive and negative processes. Now, we know we can't use those with Chapter 14 regulations anyway, and we always want to use reinforcement, but it's just something that really sat with me, and I really enjoyed that quote. So we know what research has taught us, and it's up to us to learn and use the research. There's just no alternative. So right here I showed you previously a setup of program modifications that most of you, for a positive behavior support plan that most of you will find in your IEP softwares. This is a table that any of you who attended Ball State University may recognize. It was part of a school assignment, and I've kind of kept it because I find the visual is just very helpful in creating your behavior intervention, and also for explaining to staff what you're doing and to parents. So the big things that I want to hit home here, the bottom, the red pathway, is all the problems, what's occurring before the problem behavior, what the problem behavior is, and what's maintaining it. We throw that little blue block in there to interrupt, and we're teaching a replacement behavior. And then the blue blocks at the top, especially the first two, are so important because those are everything you're doing to reduce motivation to engage in that problem behavior. And that's really what we want. We want those preventative strategies to be implemented. So hopefully if we have that, the student will not want to engage in problem behavior because we're already doing those good things. So here's an example of this pathway with attention maintained behavior. And I'm not going to go through the whole scenario because there's each scenario that I have here is ones we've already discussed in this PowerPoint. But the important thing to remember, like I said, are these two blue boxes here. They are what we're going to use to reduce motivation to engage in problem behavior. And these are all where you should be putting your preventative strategies. So escape maintained behavior. The only caveat I want to put on this, remember to evaluate your environment if your student is trying to escape you and the work environment. Why is the student doing this? A break card is never the answer in this incident. Make sure that you're analyzing your antecedent conditions. And the last one is tangible maintained. And, you know, a lot of this just comes from dense opportunities of man training. So if you have patent consultants in your classroom, you might get sick of us hearing us, have you done manding today? Is there man training? How much man training is occurring? Manding is so important because, like I said, everybody needs to convey their wants and needs. And if our students can't do that, we shouldn't be surprised if problem behavior is occurring. So it is so critical that we teach these communication skills. Did you think of these things? Did you think of staff training? When teachers train classroom staff with clear instructions, modeling observations and performance feedback, paraprofessionals perform teaching procedures and behavior protocols with increased fidelity, which lead to better outcomes for our students. And I know many of you as teachers don't have a lot of time, but training doesn't have to be lengthy. It could be for 10 minutes a day, 20 minutes during the week, whatever you are able to squeeze in, which will allow staff to come together and ask questions or review new programs. This time is extremely valuable as it will ultimately increase fidelity in your classroom and ensure that all staff are on the same page. If you develop that man down schedule that I talked about earlier, you can pull yourself out of that schedule and work with some staff members if you don't have time throughout the day to do staff training. The other piece is treatment integrity. Treatment integrity is the accuracy in which an intervention or teaching procedure is implemented. Since all of your students' interventions look different, treatment integrity is important to be sure that the intervention is being implemented the same way across all staff members who work with that student. An easy way to assess for fidelity or integrity is to use one of these checklists. You can find these checklists on that resource file link that we're going to share at the end. So just a quick review of all the important components. We talked about the definitions, identifying the function. The functions must match, having that clear plan that decreases motivation to engage in the problem behavior, teaching the replacement, and putting that problem on extinction, and then also having treatment integrity and staff training throughout your day. So now maybe your brain is buzzing with a variety of different thoughts than when we started. We hope you are thinking about how you can take this back to your classroom and apply it. I know whenever I was attending a conference as a teacher, I'd be texting my para saying, oh my gosh, we have something else new to try. And I'm sure her eyes were rolling or she was pretty excited, but I know I always brought a lot of new things back that I wanted to try. I often also found myself saying, oh man, I wasn't doing that right, or I could have been doing that better. If you are thinking these things, be gentle on yourself because you don't know what you don't know. But now you have the knowledge and you can move forward with it and do something right for your students. And if you find that you're still a little skeptical, that's okay too. A healthy dose of skepticism is okay, but just make sure you do your own research and try to apply these research-based methods in your classroom for your students. So as we wrap up here, there are a few things we want you to remember. There are no such things as bad kids. We have to remember that behavior of our student is a product of the environment we provide them and the teaching methods we utilize. As educators, we must do our research and utilize research-based methods. Remember, prevention is critical. If we prevent problem behavior from happening, then we should. We do this by creating reinforcement-rich environments, utilizing evidence-based teaching, and teaching critical skills to help students get ready to learn. We are aware that there are some students who will need more specialized and intensive interventions. For those students, we must make sure that we create behavior plans that are student-specific and based off of data that we have collected. We also need to continuously monitor the progress and make changes as necessary. So we hope that you've enjoyed this presentation and found it helpful. We hope that you can take this information back to your classroom and utilize it. Here is the contact information for Lori and myself, and we'd be happy to answer any emails that you have with questions. So here's that resource file link. You'll have the printout, so you can just type in this in your web browser and it'll take a little bit to download. And yeah, so there are our references. We have a couple slides of them, but thank you for joining us today. And like I said, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. We are always happy to answer questions. We're always happy with any teachers that want to know more or just want some clarification. We're always here to help.